All right. If you can hear me, I will actually ask one of you if you can hear me. Mr. Wagner, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, sounds good. I assume everyone else can hear me. There are, let me see here, I'm trying to look for the options here. Okay, so we have the chat, which is available if you need to ask questions, or there should be, I don't see it, but there should be a way to raise your hand as a participant. You should have an option that says like raise hand, or if you don't see that, there's at least a thumbs up or something like that. Yeah, okay, there we go. Yeah, some of you have figured it out. So it's basically a toggle button. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand. And okay, good. It looks like everyone's found it. Okay. Good. Okay. So now, turn it off unless you have a question. If you do have a question, leave your hand up. Okay. Okay. Adam, do you have a question? No? Okay. You can't hear me. Okay. Okay, Mazen cannot hear me, he says. Okay. Well, let me check other people. I assume everyone else hear me. Okay. So it sounds like Mazen. Sounds like there's an issue with Mazen's controls. Let me see here. Yeah, sound is set. It looks like everyone can hear me. Okay, you can hear me now? Okay, good. All right. Well, I know this was kind of a last minute change. I apologize for those who were hoping to fight against traffic and nasty snow to go into campus. We have found that the remote and online formats are both very, very popular this semester. Online courses filled up way quicker than face-to-face courses, but when we switch this to remote, I know some people prefer, being in class and stuff, but due to some of the restrictions going on right now, this actually leaves it a little less restricted because we have the technology to hold class, even if it's completely disgusting weather. So unless I just feel like making a snowman or something, we'll probably still hold class even if it's snowy and nasty outside. So I live in Dearborn, so it's kind of nice not to drive to Farmington Hills in a blizzard. But the general reason we're doing this, obviously, is because of the pandemic going on right now and the new flare-ups. It seems that even though the variant that's going around right now does not seem as severe, it is spreading very, very quickly. I went through the whole pandemic with only a couple people, knowing a couple people that actually ended up infected. And now I know, like, I could name at least a dozen people who are coughing their lungs out at home and one or two under sedation on ventilators right now. So it's definitely been quite a semester. So, or quite the beginning of the semester. So yeah, it's not a fun time. So this is CIS 2252. I appreciate all of you getting back to me and letting me know for sure that you would be here. I wanted to reduce the possibility of people just showing up on campus and not having anyone there. So everyone got back to me, and that was unexpected, but happy that I did in fact get a hold of everyone. So let me see here. Just making sure you are being recorded. So just be aware of that. If you ask questions or something, if you don't really want your voice on or whatever, you can try to ask it through the chat. But what I do with the recordings typically is I would upload them to YouTube, but they'll be under a private link, basically, or an unlisted link. So people have to have the link in order to get to it. So I'll just post that for the class if someone, couldn't make it or whatever. However, you are, as to the best of your abilities, expected to, show up for the Zoom meetings. If something comes up where you're just way too sick or you have something, things come up, it's fine. There's not an official you get points for showing up, but in the same respect, when we do remote synchronous, it does help us to interact and learn, and a lot of times you can be a great advantage to yourself and others by asking questions and coming up with ideas or potential problems as well. Give me just a minute here. Trying to see if I meant to check something real quick on the Visual Studio side of things. We'll have to double check that, I guess. Okay, so for this class, if you have not programmed before, that's okay. I think it does say it would be in your best interest to have known some sort of programming before taking the class, or taking maybe 1500 or something. A lot of you have, I believe, had 1500 according to what I'm seeing. But that doesn't mean that you can't succeed if you haven't had any kind of programming before. So CIS 1500 is basically our Java 1 course. I would say in general, if they were the same language, this course covers approximately what Java 1 and Java 2, so 2151. If we kind of slam those two together and then put it in C++, that would be what this course is. So it's not quite a data structures course. It doesn't go full into data structures, but this counts as usually the beginning programming class at a lot of universities. Some will take the Java courses too in sequence, but a lot of colleges and universities will take this as the beginning programming course. I do get a lot of students from OU and Wayne State and Ann Arbor and U of M Dearborn on occasion that are not computer science majors, but they need a programming course. So they'll take a programming course a lot of times, and it's frequently C++. Okay, so a couple notes here. This is D2L. Most of you are probably familiar with it. D2L, you can access through, well, here, one second. Oh, I hate this thing. Okay, I'm gonna move it over. All right, move it to my other screen. At oaklandcc.edu, which is the college's website, you will notice that there are several menus here. Some parts of the menus change, some do not. The persistent portion of the menu includes resources and gateways. If you go under gateways and you have D2L right there, you will get a login page. You log in with your standard username and password, and then when you log in, you see your home page. That's what this is right here. It shows you announcements from the college and also sometimes from Brightspace, which owns D2L, basically provides it. And to go to a specific course, you use this little waffle iron looking thing up here with the matrix. And you will probably have far less courses than I have here. I have a few, some from previous semesters, but I usually pin the ones that are current. And this class would be obviously the object-oriented programming. So if you are taking another course and they're providing information on D2L, you will see that as well. So once you click on the specific course under this menu, you then go to the courses homepage. So this is the courses homepage. I will leave announcements. I will try to continuously keep posting this just to make sure that everyone can have access to Zoom each week and don't have to go back too many weeks or anything to try to find the link. But I would recommend bookmarking it or putting it in a note or something on your desktop or what have you. It will remain the same. It is a scheduled meeting for each week, and it opens up when I log on, but it's scheduled for the 6. And I think, I can't remember if I set it to 9:45 or 10, but it should, it could record until then, until I tell it to stop. Okay, so a little bit about the course and about me. So this is again 2252 C++ programming. Right here, this is the email address that you would get a hold of me at. When you do contact me, it would be in your best interest to use your OCC email address as well, student.oaklandcc.edu email address. I know it's kind of irritating to keep up with a bunch of email addresses. You might have one for work and one for, you know, gaming and one for your normal private stuff, and then one for school or two for school if you go to two different schools. So I know it gets a little bit irritating, but if you use the student.oaklandcc.edu address, then that can help me be confident that it is you and not some random person. So that's good. Excuse me. One of the, I'm looking for the student list. Just give me a second here. It got shrunk. There we go. There we go. Got it. Okay. So now I can see if you raise hands or something. All right. Okay. It's quite a busy list. Okay. So a little bit about me, in case you're not familiar with me, you haven't had the pleasure of having me for a class before. My name's John Baugh. I have a PhD in computer science from the University of Michigan at Dearborn. I also have my master's and bachelor's degrees from there as well, also in computer science. I finished that in 2018. I'm probably starting another degree soon, master's degree in mathematics, but don't quote me on that. Why am I doing that? Because I'm sick in the head. OCC, that'll probably be through Johns Hopkins or Purdue though. But OCC email is jpbaugh@oaklandcc.edu. Again, use your student email to contact me. And then the office location is F113, but don't go there or you'll be lonely. Okay. I'm the department chair at Oakland Community College Orchard Ridge campus for computer and information science. So generally, if you have a problem with one of your other adjuncts or one of the other full-timers even, you can come to me and we'll try to resolve it. If you have a problem with me, you can shut your dirty mouth. All right, so now meeting days and times. The synchronous delivery is remote. So synchronous means we will meet at the given time. And then remote obviously means we don't have to be all in the same place at the same time. So Monday 6 to 9:45. That doesn't mean that we will always extend that whole time. I found that it seems that when I'm doing asynchronous recordings for some of my courses, those go a lot shorter because I don't have interaction with students. Here I have interaction with you guys, but they do seem to go a little bit shorter in general than face-to-face for whatever reason. And obviously classroom, we don't have to be in a particular location since we're remote. So you can be in your pajamas at home or, you know, in your bathroom. I hope you're not in your bathroom. That's weird, but Starbucks or library or what have you. Course catalog description. Students should have a basic understanding of programming. That's not necessarily accurate, but the idea is that this is supposed to be slightly more advanced or slightly more, I guess the pace that we go at is maybe a little bit more aggressive than say CIS 1500, but it's a completely different language and we start from the very beginning. So don't worry if you're brand new to programming, that's fine. I will occasionally make, probably more than occasionally, I will make frequent mention of Java to try to pull ideas in from other courses you may have taken, since a large number of you have taken the Java course. But if you don't know what I'm saying when I say stuff, hey, this is like such and such in Java, you don't have to know the Java stuff. So it's not necessary for you to succeed. But it does help a little extra for those that have. Sometimes I can make references that will help you improve in Java and also improve in C++. All right, students will be instructed in the syntax and semantics of the standard C++ language. Topics covered include control structures, arrays, pointers, strings, dynamic memory management, class definitions, and object-based development, file I/O, overloading, exception handling, and template libraries. Students will be required to complete computer-based assignments inside and outside of class. I guess we're all outside of class right now. Course prerequisites, none. Prior programming experience is a plus. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but these are the common course outcomes. Basically, what are you supposed to be able to do to varying degrees of success after you have taken this course? Okay, so you will notice that a lot of them have to do with writing C++ code, but also some things involve being able to describe certain things as well. So if you're asked about certain topics, it might be useful to know how to describe them. Now, a lot of people, when you learn programming, and a lot of courses you might even take online or sometimes through Udemy or YouTube or just wherever, you might see that some of the people aren't big on, oh, you don't really need to know the terminology, let's just do code. There's different things you need to understand, and certain resources are good at teaching different things, but it really is important to understand terminology as well. If you can't communicate with other developers, you're going to have a very, very hard time of working on anything but real small projects by yourself. So it's important to be able to do that. The other important thing with terminology is not only does it provide a framework for your brain of what to do and help you describe to your coworkers what's going on, it provides an industry-specific set of terminology that you can use to talk to your coworkers and describe things that aren't articulated well with layman's terms. Not only does it do all that, it also will open up the door for if you go to a job interview or something like that, and they might want to know, okay, well, can you describe what an object is to us? Can you tell us what inheritance is? Can you tell us what composition or polymorphism, or what's a virtual function? What's a pure virtual function? So there's all kinds of different things that they could ask you during a job interview. And if you know it, you will put yourself ahead of the pack. So required text, I'm going to put required in double quotes here. I would say that, okay, if you're like a professional C++ developer or Java developer or Python developer in industry, and you already know a lot of programming stuff, or let's say you've taken Java 1, Java 2 already, and you have a different C++ book that you're more comfortable with or something like that, that's okay. We're not going to do stuff so intensely out of this book that it requires you to have this exact book. However, this is very, 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 very strongly recommended. I will make reference to it a lot. The slides are from it. It's an excellent resource to have at your disposal.
Yeah.
Where's your
Trays?
Just give damn, but
no, we should Twitch it.
Trays?
you said this is on Twitch.
Damn, you good, yeah.
Okay, we're gonna mute that. Also, try not to give out the code to random people either, because that would be bad. But I think that's a student who just forgot to mute when they came in. All right. So if you do have a question, though, hit the raise your hand button, and I will try to unmute you or ask you to unmute, and then you can ask it. Okay. So general policies. Obviously, you get supplemental material as well, but general policies are, it's the college policy that no student should engage in behavior which in the judgment instructor is academically dishonest. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically you should know, don't cheat. Now, I don't mind, and I'm not completely ignorant to the fact that you're probably going to, you're probably going to have a Discord or something like that set up to talk to other students. I don't really care, that's fine. You could say, he looks like a fat Seth Rogen, whatever you want to do on those is fine. However, the only difference between myself and Seth Rogen is that I replace weed with fried chicken. That's my problem. But you can set up these Discord chats. You can help each other. You can talk through different ideas and stuff like that. You never know if I have a spy. So I would just be careful. don't post like entire solutions. And I can tell when you guys take stuff off of various academic sites, Chegg, and stuff like that. So I can tell when stuff like that stuff goes on like that. Also, be aware that many of us instructors have accounts on sites like Chegg and like the Rent-A-Coder type sites, and the sites that post solutions to previous semesters and stuff. And a lot of us, it's always a possibility that one of your instructors or several of your instructors might post solutions that are very, 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 very close to the correct solution, under a name that looks like a plausible student, but that they're slightly off just enough in certain ways that we can tell that it was our code. Even if you manipulate it, we should be able to still tell it's our code. So that would be very, very bad for you if we catch you cheating. So don't cheat. Stack Overflow. I've had students turn in assignments that weren't even in the right language because they didn't pay attention the whole semester and thought they were in a completely different programming language and couldn't even recognize the language with which they were working. So if you find yourself in that position about halfway through the semester, or hopefully earlier, 2-3 weeks, and you're like, okay, I still don't know how to write hello world to the console, you might consider dropping the course or asking for help very quickly. I'm not trying to scare anyone, but I'm saying please stay on top of it as best as you can. That's all I'm asking. And if you have questions, please email me. That's fine to ask questions. Check the syllabus first, check announcements, just to save me more time. I try to get back on email as quickly as possible, but I have to help a whole lot of students, and a lot of students have the same questions all at once. So I do try to also post stuff on D2L to answer questions. I might set up a specific discussion board just for frequently asked questions or for you to talk about things in. Go under. The best thing you could do every time you come in, I'll usually put an announcement so that you know what you're doing. You would want to go under content, and then to get the syllabus I'm reading off of, it's under the syllabus module. Modules are kind of like folders on the learning management system, D2L. So the syllabus module and the week 1 module. The syllabus module has this PDF. You can click it just to look at it, or you can download it using this little arrow. You probably have fewer options than I do, but you can download it. Under week 1, we also have all of this stuff right here, the Zoom meeting link posted again. But every week, what I will try to do, I've gotten in the habit of doing with my courses now, is a welcome and learning guide. Okay, thank you for the Discord. Okay, I will not join unless people ask me to. It's totally fine. I don't like joining student emails because people try to ask me questions while I'm trying to play Rust running away from bears, and that pisses me off. So all right, so this right here is my welcome to the course, and again, it explains what remote and synchronous is and stuff like that. But yeah, if anyone wants me on the Discord, I can join it. It's not a big deal, but it's but usually it's just one other platform I have to keep track of, and it's usually just easier for me to put stuff on D2L for everyone to see. But anyone who wants to join that Discord that has apparently been set up is fine. Okay, so week 1 to do. Students getting in the way of the Rust grind. Yes, students are getting in the way of the Rust grind sometimes. So here's what you must or should do during the first, oh, this says 3 weeks. That's not right. Sorry, that's not right at all. I gotta edit this. Some of these are copy paste issues from an accelerated course. Give me just 1 second. I will fix that. First week. Okay. See, correcting as we go along here. Okay, there we go. So you want to review the syllabus that we're going over right now. And you want to also read the relevant chapters for whatever's on the week. We'll look at the schedule in just a minute. That's on the syllabus as well. So the relevant chapter slides are available as well under content, under the appropriate weeks. And then the graded assignments, I will list those. If there's anything for the week that you have that's actually graded, then I would recommend using that. And yes, Professor Charneski has, you spelled it correctly, Professor Charneski has a Discord channel. He has a Twitch channel also and a YouTube. I'm not sure if his Discord is listed on either of those, but he does have a lot of students that frequent all of those sites. Okay, so this week your graded assignment is just to do this week 1 engagement. And you must post your initial post. And then once you've posted, you are able to see other people's posts. Okay, so if you look at it and you're like, where's everyone's post? And then you post, now you could potentially be the first one, so don't freak out if that's the case. You just have to come back a little later. But you have to respond to at least one of your peers for full points. Okay, I can't stress that enough. I do this every semester, especially for courses that have any kind of remote component to them, because I think it keeps people engaged. I used to not do it. And then people were like, they thought I was aloof or not paying enough attention to the class or not interacting enough. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows I'm here. I'm looking and reading your posts and giving you points, and I want you to interact with each other so you don't feel like you're just kind of floating out on your own island. The week 1 engagement under the graded assessments for the week, so that when it says graded, that means it's worth points. Okay, it's not optional. I mean, you could skip it, but then you lose points. This one's a gimme. I mean, this is 10 points you get if you figure a programming assignment, or your first programming assignment is like 100 points. So during the semester, you'll have about 1.5 programming assignments worth of engagement. I've had students get far lower grades than they wanted because they just never participated in the engagement. They're like, but I did all the programming assignments. It's like, yeah, but you didn't do all the assignments. That's like if I was at work and I did all the code, yeah, but you didn't put any documentation. No one knows what the hell you're doing. So that's equally important. Okay, so definitely engage. This is a very, very simple engagement. It looks like many of you already have participated. So this is basically it may be almost everyone. So this is basically just a hello to the class, some autobiographical information. And then I'm just asking a couple questions in here. You don't have to put it in a bulleted thing. It can be a flowing paragraph, just talking about your aspirations and things. So basically think about what degree or certificates are you working on at OCC, if any. You might just be here for personal development, or you might be taking the class just to satisfy a requirement at another university or college. If you'd like to share that, that's good too. Do you possess any other degrees? I've had students with no degrees. I've had students that already had a certificate and years of experience in industry. I've had people that have had associate's degrees. I had one lady one semester who actually ended up being one of my supplemental instructors for a while. She had a master's degree in computer science from University of Texas at Arlington, but she had been, she basically decided she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom for many years. And then she wanted to once her children got older, her youngest son finally turned 18 and started going off to college. So she decided that she wanted to get back into the swing of things, So she wanted to kind of dust some cobwebs off. So she was very, very diligent and took some classes and got a certificate in software engineering on top of her already master's degree in computer science. And as far as I know, I think she's working for a bank right now writing software for them. So tons of different students. I've had students I've had doctors, I've had lawyers, I've had mechanical engineering, people with master's degrees in mechanical engineering that were, one worked for a vehicle company and was just trying to optimize some of the processes they had that took literally dozens of people, weeks, working 40 hours a week, almost exclusively on these little data wrangling problems, but they were doing it, I wouldn't say manually, but they were doing a lot of it in Excel. And trying to get a hold of all this data they were collecting from tests on cars. And we sat in my office one day, and this was C#, but it was kind of the same idea. He wanted to he showed me this data and said, we need to try to optimize this, but I have all these problems. What can I do? And probably within about 30 minutes, we had a program that summarized all the data that, 12 or 13 people in his department were working full time for a couple of weeks trying to summarize. We did it when we ran the program, it took about 5 seconds, and it, saved them all that time. So every time they run this data again, they don't have to spend weeks and weeks and weeks doing things to it. They just run the program and it summarizes everything for them, and they were very, very happy. It saved them hundreds and thousands of man hours. So it's very, very, or sorry, person hours. They're called person hours now. But it was very, very good. It was a good situation for them. And I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of stories about things like that. So this course could be a launching for you to become very interested in coding if you aren't already. It could be solving a specific problem. It could be helping you move up in your particular field that you're in, your particular job, or you might be finishing off a particular degree or certificate. So additional ones, or enhancing what you already have. So what are your aspirations for further education? So let's say that you are just finishing off an associate degree. Do you have any aspirations to get a bachelor's? Do you want to get a bachelor's in computer science? And do you want to get a bachelor in technology or IT? Do you want to go to Walsh? Do you want to go to Wayne State? Do you want to minor in computer science and major in biochemistry? I've had that. It's the sky's the limit. Programming helps pretty much all the different fields. How do you think a course on C++ programming will help you accomplish your goals? And obviously the most fundamental answer might be, I need the credit. Okay, that's a good answer. But what do you think the actual practical information from the course might help you with? The information you learn in the course is sometimes very useful, I hope. And as I said, I've had students from all walks of life. I had a couple that had told me they worked in industry as software engineers for sometimes 15, 20 years, but they never formally had a course on, say, C++ or Java or C#. And then they take a formal course and they start filling in the gaps of their education that they didn't understand, or that they had tried to self-teach and didn't understand maybe the first time around. And they're like, they have all these aha moments where they're like, oh, that makes sense now. Now I know why we do this. And oh, that's so great. Now I can do this and this and this. And I didn't know how to do that before. So even people who have a lot of experience generally find these courses to be useful. All right, so that's the engagement. We just want to get to know you. You don't have to write a novel or wax eloquent like I just did. Just write a little bit about yourself. And then when you see someone else's, a peer post theirs, you might want to just comment on it, like just say something encouraging or say hello to them or welcome to the course. I would recommend don't treat this so much like an assignment. Treat it as a get to know everyone. When we do the further engagement in the future, those will be more probably questions about the material we're going on. But again, it'll be less formal than, oh, if you don't get every little detail right, I'm not going to give you full points. If you make an honest attempt and it's clear that you're at least thinking through the questions I ask, and you respond to your peers and interact, then I will give you full points. That's what the engagement's for. It's more formative than it is summative, meaning it's basically to form you as a developer and a person and your abilities to interact with others, more so than it is to summarize what you've learned. For that, we have the programming assignments and we have midterm, okay, for stuff like that. Okay, so back to Mr. Syllabus here. The don't cheat, obviously. The programs, the homework, the engagement is included in the homework, so that's why it says varies. You may not get an engagement every single week, but especially the first few weeks, I plan on trying to make sure you have engagements so that you can stay connected. But if you have a couple projects due that week and there's a lot of busy stuff going on, I may not give you an engagement that week, just so you don't have to, just so it's not one more thing you have to take care of. Okay, so I try to be sensible. I use a straight point system for the course, so I'm not going to say, oh, you're projects are worth this percent, your midterm is worth that percent. It does end up being a particular percentage, but I just go by the straight point system. Your engagements, again, are 10 points each, and you figure you'll get about, over 15 weeks, you get about 10 of them or 11 or whatever. So you figure that's about anywhere up to 15, but I kind of doubt you'll have that many. But you figure they're worth, about the first project and a half, or worth about, project 2. So it is a decent amount of points, and they're basically gimmies, meaning as long as you put in a little bit of effort and it's clear you're working, you get the points. Grading scale is pretty typical. I, again, would recommend you aim for this right here. Don't aim for that. This is not a cake course. This isn't a real simple course or anything, but it's also not, it's not super complicated. So as long as you follow the material and you are careful to stay up with the material each week, you should do just fine. Ask questions after you've done a little bit of trying to figure it out on your own. And if you can't figure something out, or you're not sure about how to ask a question, I can help you work through that. So if you're not quite, familiar with the terminology just yet, we can work through that. But don't aim for this. I do get students who fail, but it's usually because they just don't do their assignments. So try to make sure you do that. All right. So end mark. If you're here, basically you don't, and you've logged into D2L, then you won't get an end mark. The end mark basically means you never showed up or did anything. I assess that during the first couple weeks to, first, I think for say 15-week course, the first 3 weeks, I will have to decide whether, to issue an end mark. But if you're here, don't worry about it. You've been here, obviously. So, and you've clearly been to D2L at some point. Late policy. Now, we have to be very careful on late policy. This says, please submit it on the appropriate assignment, or the appropriate assignment listed, submit it at the appropriate time, up to midnight of the due date. I always put it as 11:59 because when I put midnight, everyone gets confused. Does that mean that morning or that evening? So I just put 11:59 and no one gets confused. So 5% deduction every day that the assignment's late. Weekend would be like, count as 5% for the whole weekend. After 5 business days, assignments no longer accepted unless I prove an exception. Reserve the right to waive penalties due to extenuating circumstances, and encourage everyone to do their best, though, to complete and upload the assignment on or before the due date. Okay, so this obviously does not work for any kind of assessed program or something that, let's say the last program is due the last day of class. If it's the last day of class, I can't extend it. Okay, the only option I would be able to do in some rare situations would be to give you an incomplete for the course until you turn in the appropriate stuff. And then I have to regrade it. I have to do a bunch of paperwork and turn it in. So you're going to give all of us a headache, including yourself, if you do that. So I'm not saying I won't do it, because I've done it before if there are, extreme circumstances. But, please don't do any of the, oh, it's the end of the semester and I haven't done any of the projects. Can I turn them all in the last week of class? No. Okay, please don't do that to me. Because I don't like to see students cry. And I'm going to unfortunately have to make you cry if you do that. So student policy and support information. FERPA, besides having a fun name, is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. According to this act, college personnel are not allowed to release a student's personal information to anyone, including other students. This also goes for parents. If you have a parent, whether you are an adult formally or not, I do get students all the way from, I think I had a 14-year-old was the youngest I've ever had, all the way up to 90 something. Okay, so I've had students in a wide range. You are all considered adults when you take courses here. And as far as that's concerned, it doesn't matter if your parents or grandparents or aunt and uncle or whoever is paying for your courses. I still do not answer their questions about attendance-based questions or about how you're doing in the course. If you need to show them how you're doing in the course, you can log in and show them on D2L. If you have a situation where I have to speak with or email back and forth with a parent or someone else for whatever particular reason, or have to prove to your employer so that they pay for it, that happens occasionally, then you need to explicitly, using your official email address, write me an email saying, I authorize you to speak with so-and-so and so-and-so, about my progress during the semester or what have you. So that usually doesn't happen, but I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware. So Academics with Disabilities, or sorry, Americans with Disabilities Act, rather. My eyes shifted down here. Students requiring special assistance, including those affected by the ADA, should contact the Access Office, which will inform the instructor of special conditions pertaining to their learning. I've gotten a couple sheets for all across all of my sections. I've received a few. So if you do have any kind of, whether it's emotional, mental, learning, anything that, or physical, obviously, if you have any kind of disabilities that you think it would aid you to be registered with the Access Office, then I would recommend clicking on this link. This is a hyperlink, so you can go to the Access Office and update your information, make sure they have it, so that I will be made aware of special conditions and things like that. So sometimes that includes extra tests, extra time on tests, or things like that. So, all right, so up next, the Academic Support Center, or ASC, whereas the Access Office takes care of students who might have special accommodations that need to be given. Academic Support Center is for everyone, okay, whether you have accommodation needs or not. So ASC provides programs and services that help students to be successful. They have tutoring, which is one of the biggest things that can be useful. I believe they have a tutor or two that can help a little bit with 2252. They have some tutors that do like some of the Java courses. Some of them can sometimes give you an idea about C++ and things like that, even if they don't formally tutor in C++, because Java and C++ have a lot of similarities. But I believe they do have one or two that are actually really good with C++. So you could, they do some online tutoring as well. So you can set up the tutoring through here. Supplemental instructor, we don't have one for this class, but I do for my, I think only one of my classes this semester for the mobile app development. I think a couple of you are in that. We do have a great supplemental instructor for that. They also have study skill seminars. Now, I know a lot of people think I'm too busy for those, whatever, I'm not going to go to any of them. But if they do have a study skill seminar available, I think they're doing them over Zoom and things right now. So if you want to keep up with their website and see what's available, these can actually be very useful, because a lot of students complain, I was never taught how to study right or study correctly, or I waste a ton of time studying and I don't know how to, can I reduce it? And I always forget stuff. Like, how do I make my study time better? Some of these skill seminars, I've had students come to me and say, you know what, I thought that was going to be a complete waste of my time, but it actually saved me dozens of hours this week. And I'm really glad that I went for the hour-long or hour-and-a-half long study skill seminar. I'm sure if some specific thing comes up, we could probably arrange for a small amount of extra credit for you to attend as well. Technology appropriate use regulations, or TAUR. I was actually on the committee that revised this. It probably needs updated again, because that was 2014, I think. Prior to that, it had been like 10 years. So it had things like don't copy floppy disks and stuff that needed to be removed. But basically the gist of this is, if you're on campus or connected with, say, our Zoom meeting here, you don't abuse the technology, okay? That's basically what it's saying. Don't do unscrupulous things if you're on campus. Don't, using the college email to contact your drug dealer is probably not a good idea. Looking at porn in the CIS labs, which I don't know why people would do that, but things happen. Just don't do stuff like that. It's just a bad idea. And if you're on campus, just remember, if you're connected to the school's Wi-Fi, that you are using OCC's data network. So just be aware of that. This usually isn't a big problem, but there have been students who had very, very serious ramifications depending on what they were doing. One was a few years ago, a student was sitting in a cybersecurity class and got bored. The irony, it being a cybersecurity class, they set up they launched, basically, there's no nice way to say it. They launched a denial of service attack against the OCC's computers from inside the institution. And we'll just say that they were escorted out of the classroom very, very quickly. And I believe were charged with a felony. So don't do stupid things. Just don't do it. Public safety. The Oakland Community College Department of Public Safety is committed to providing students, faculty, staff, and visitors with a safe and secure environment. You can read the public safety website for more information. So I would recommend, especially if you're also taking other classes, and some of them maybe didn't go remote. Some courses, especially those in like natural sciences, are harder, much more difficult to hold remotely. So a lot of them choose not to, or they might have the lab in person or something like that. So because it's, you can get at-home chemistry kits or biology kits and microscopes and things like that, but it's generally much better to do it in person, some of them. Okay, so computer science is kind of like, and programming is like, you can kind of do it from anywhere. It's a little bit easier to do, but some of the natural sciences, you might still be on campus. So if that is the case, make sure that you connect with the public safety website, make sure that you are signed up to receive alerts. They do send out like text messages and things like that. If the campus is closed, if there's a water main breaks or the heat goes out, or we have a blizzard or something, they will probably tell you, hey, don't come to class, you will drown in the snow, or something like that. So I would definitely look at that site. The other thing is, if you're on campus, obviously for this course it's not that big of a deal, but if you are on campus, please be aware that if there is an active assailant situation, we don't call it active shooter anymore because people are using vans and machetes and all kinds of fun stuff now. If there is like an assailant type situation, just be aware the run, hide, fight is the general, not mnemonic, but general kind of motto that everyone should remember: run, hide, fight. If you can get away from the danger, that's the easiest, well, not easiest, but it's the best thing to do. Hiding is not a wussy thing to do. If someone has a gun and you have your fists, usually guns win. Knives, even, you don't want to get cut. You don't know where that knife's been. So even if you don't get stabbed, you just get barely sliced by something sharp. You don't want to get infected. You don't want to have any kind of danger with anyone causing any kind of problem on campus. And then fight is generally a last resort. But the general idea is, if someone brings a gun or a machete or tries to threaten your life, if you hit them over the head with a fire extinguisher, they get what they deserve. So fun times. I learned all this. I learned how to be violent from Rust. Okay, so the course schedule down here. I suppose you could maul someone with a bear, but I'm not sure how you would use a bear as a weapon. There was a person who attacked someone at a Wendy's through the drive-through window with an alligator once, which was a very Florida thing to do, I thought. It's very exciting. Stick them up. Give me all your money. Here's my alligator. It's just weird. Anyway, so this is the schedule for the semester. We have the different weeks. It says 17. It's a little like weird the way it fell, because we do have actually 2 weeks where you don't actually have class. Strangely enough, next week we do not have class because it's MLK Day. I know it falls on kind of a weird sequence, but since this is a Monday course, you have the Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service off. use it to relax or do nice things for other people. Kind things is a good thing to do. This week we go over chapter 1. That's the readings, Introduction to Computers and Programming, and you should attempt to install Visual Studio Community Edition IDE or Visual Studio Code. These are two different programs. If you are on a PC, then I definitely recommend Visual Studio Community Edition in 2022. And even though Visual Studio is available for Mac, and I don't think it's VS Code's available for PC, Mac, and Linux. But Visual Studio Community Edition is available for PC and Mac. However, I don't believe it supports C++ still, but I will look into that. It supports like C# and a couple other things. I'll have to double check to see if the newest edition, because this just came out not super long ago. 2019 didn't, so I don't know if I don't think 2020 did either. So the 2022 edition may or may not support C++ for Mac. If you have a Mac, you can use VS Code. That's one of the options. You could conceivably use Xcode as well. That is an IDE that a lot of people on Mac use, but VS Code is very, very popular as well. So MLK Day next week, so we won't meet on Zoom next week, but the following week we will. Introduction to C++, this is where we really start getting into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty. Expressions and interactivity the following week, selection or decision control statements. So that's one of the categories of control flow in a program is called selection or decision. That would involve things like, if you're familiar with coding, it would involve things like if statements, if else statements, switch statements. Then we do repetition statements, which are loops, and also file IO, how to interact with files. Instead of just taking input and doing output to the console and from the keyboard, you can learn how do we interact with files. Truth be told, file IO and database interaction and networking and stuff, they're when you do a command line application like we'll be doing mostly in this class, most of those applications end up working and interacting with files and things like that more than they do with people directly. But anyway, you get your first major programming assignment that day. I know that seems like a long way off, but honestly, if you're not keeping up with the material up to that point, you're going to have a really, really bad day when that programming assignment comes. So you have the first programming assignment. Then we talk about functions and recursion on the 21st. You have midwinter recess. That's across all courses and for the entire week. So I believe it's like, I think it's 28 through the 5th or something. I don't remember exactly. So keep your eye out on that. Week after that, this means build a snowman, which you're usually able to do in Michigan in September and any month past that, all the way until about May, where we have something resembling spring, and then it starts snowing again. So classes and objects, chapter 7 afterwards. Midterm exam, that's a little past the midterm, but that's when we have the midterm exam, and you also get your programming assignment 2 assigned. There will be no formal meeting during the midterm examination, and it will be done through D2L at your convenience within reason. I set up, basically it's through quizzes, quote unquote, on D2L. And what it does is it allows you to go in whenever you are available during the week, from one time to another time over several days. Once you start it, you get, I think it's set to 3 or 4 hours. And then you'll be able to complete it within that period. And once you submit it, it will probably be mostly multiple choice and true and false. So it should be auto graded or something like that. So let me read some questions we have. I couldn't even build a snowman with the snow I have now. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, hopefully we get a nice big dump of snow so you can build all the snowmen you'd ever want. I just want to make sure so those content under reading supposed to be completed prior to the week. It's listed or prior to the meeting. That's a good question. It would behoove you. Obviously this week it wasn't as, pertinent, but I would say it would probably help you if you tried to read through at least a little bit of it prior to class, just to get kind of a heads up. But that's really up to you. As long as you have it read during the week that it is assigned, then it would be it'll be good. Some people work differently. Some people prefer reading it and then listening, then joining the lecture and participating, and then you'll have more to contribute and more questions to ask. So I would probably say that's probably a better for most people, is to read first and discuss. But some people start reading it in certain chapters, they might look at it, I would say do your best, but some people might look at it and say, I can't make heads or tails of this topic, I'm going to just wait until the lecture. And that's okay too. But I would recommend reading through, or at least trying to skim through the chapter. The best thing is to at least look through the code, maybe try to do a couple of the code examples. Yeah, prior to classes, that would be my preference too. I would say you'd probably, that's my own personal study, the way I study better, but I'm not going to say that's the way that, everyone else does better. Everyone has different techniques that work better for them. So, but I'd say familiarity, it's better to be taught the material after you're already at least sort of familiar with it. I have a lot of students, what they'll do is they'll skim through it before the class just to get an idea of some of the major terms, and they'll look at the code and they'll try to run it and things like that in Visual Studio. That's a good technique. And then during the class, we talk about it, you'll have questions, and then some people will go back and they'll try to read more in depth on the topics we discussed, or vice versa. Some people read everything very in depth the first time through, and then we talk about it in class. They'll probably have more questions than someone who hadn't read. And then they might go back and skim through it later. So there's ways to optimize your study time so you're not cramming all the time. Okay, so we got the selection, midwinter recess, classes and objects, big discussion, midterm examination and project 2 assigned on the 14th, Pi Day. The midterm, you'll notice if you look a little bit further down here, this is the end, there's no final. So that's correct. There's no final examination. I consider your project 4 being the ultimate assessment of what we're doing. So it's more of a project-based course. Some courses I have finals in, some I don't. Since this is more project-based and less what most people would refer to as theory or rote knowledge. So I would say that we don't really need a final, but we do have a midterm assessment, and also you have the engagements, which are not listed on the syllabus anywhere, and potentially additional little homework assignments that I might assign throughout the semester. But we might do well with just this. We might do just the projects and just the engagements. Okay, so after the midterm, you have the arrays and vectors that week, pointers on chapter 10. Then we do more class polymorphism coming into April. C strings in the string class. So for those of you that may know a little bit about C++, the C programming language is older. The C programming language was developed in the 70s. C++ was developed originally in the 80s. And then languages like Java and Python were developed in the 90s. So every decade brought forth a new and exciting language. So C was a really, really revolutionary language in the 70s. But a lot of what you work on in industry, sometimes you end up working on code that is actually more C than it is C++. So knowing a little bit about how some of that works can be useful, depending on your situation. Exceptions and templates, we talk about that kind of near the end of the course. Templates are, if you are familiar with generics in Java, like the array list, which has like the angle braces and all that fun stuff. Some of the syntax is very similar, and the concepts are very similar to templates in C++. And Java also has exceptions, it has strings, it has a lot of stuff that's going to look very familiar if you have taken Java before. If you have not, again, don't worry about it. The standard template library is the last topic. This one talks about data structures, but more how do we use them more extensively rather than how do you make your own custom data structure. We don't really go into that. this course. I teach courses at U of M that as a lecturer that do involve how do you make your own custom data structures and things like that. And I also teach the data structures course here at OCC, but it uses Java and it talks about how do you make your own data structures. So it's a pretty good course. And then I leave the last course as kind of padding. So, I mean, there's always the possibility that we have, insane power outages or something like that. I get super ill one week, or we just don't, make it a particular week, or a ton of students are sick all at once. There's all kinds of stuff that can happen. So I try to add at least a little bit of padding. We may have an additional topic, or it may just be kind of a, hey, keep working on your projects and I'll be here in case you need any help on your projects or something. Are arrays in C# similar to templates in C++? I would not say those are directly comparable. I would say that the list type and the array list types in C# are very, very, I wouldn't say they are like templates. I'd say they are generics, which are like templates. The arrays in C# are actually very similar to the arrays in Java. The C++ regular old arrays in C++ are built in, and they use what are called pointers, which are like references. And then you have in C#, they're more like the arrays in Java. Or in C++, I'm sorry, the C++, no, I said that wrong. The C# arrays, if you're talking built-in arrays, are actually more similar to the built-in arrays in Java. The array list and list types in C# are generics, which are like templates in C++. I hope that makes sense. So we will be looking at other languages a little bit here and there, just so people are, more familiar. And a lot of people have strong familiarity with certain languages, and they like pulling back to those and trying to just, try to understand things in terms of what they've seen before. So, yeah, anytime, if anyone has any questions, I'm totally open. Today's going to be probably we're going to end a lot earlier than 9:45 or what have you. When installing Visual Studio, what packages do you load? Well, you want to install the C++. Let me see here. I think it should be installed over here. I gotta delete that one. That was just stupid. Okay, when you see this, it'll probably ask you what you want to install. You want to make sure that the C++ core desktop features are installed. That's right here, desktop development with C++ on desktop and mobile. I usually include .NET also, so I can do C# and stuff like that. But I think this one's probably, we don't need mobile development with C++ unless that's just your thing. But desktop development with C++, that should select all of the stuff that you need, and then you want to do the installation or whatever. So, but I've already got it installed here. That's why it's already checked. Okay, I gotta delete this one. This one's ancient. Okay, let's see if I'm forgetting anything. Oh, I'll try to remember, just in case any of you are aware. So I have a Udemy course that, if you're familiar with the Udemy platform, if it'll ever load, and there are various C++ courses on Udemy. Many of them are very good. Tim Bachalka's course is very good. If you want to do Unreal Engine with C++, then Ben Tristram's is good. Mine is with CodeStars, which is a large organization company in the United Kingdom, and it is with Rob Percival. He started the company, his web development course, which I'm actually helping him a little bit with this semester, to make a third version of it. Has usually nearly 200,000 or 300,000 students or whatever. So this one's not quite as exciting as far as number of students, but I do have 6,000 students on this one. It just has a lot of recordings and a lot of me going over how to do different stuff. Don't buy it unless you've already bought it. Sorry, I can't do anything about refunds. It's managed through Udemy. Can't do anything. but I will post a link so that you can all have it for free. Okay. I will also give you access to my Java course and my how to do Qt development, Qt development with C++. So if you want to do like GUI applications, graphical user interface applications, I go over how to build a shopping cart application or whatever. So I will post this too, so you can have access to this whole course as well. So it's 22 hours of hearing my luxurious voice if you want to go through it. So anyway, yeah, it'll be free for all you guys. My Java course too. My Java course isn't quite as filled out yet because I've still got some material to work through on that, but I will make sure you get access to all the courses that I make. All right, so let me see here. I'll move that over there. Go back into my book. Okay. All right, they're a little more, the stuff on Udemy that I do is a little more scripted. Like I think through when I'm talking, as compared to stuff you might have seen on my YouTube or have gotten if you take it asynchronous with me. And also I sometimes ramble a little more than I plan on during actual remote discussion. But I try to stay on track most of the time. But rabbit trails, I like rabbit trails. So, and humor. So you'll definitely have humor, whether you like it or not. It probably, even though I don't have any children, it's been likened to dad jokes. So I hope you're ready for that. Anyway, so, all right, I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions about the syllabus before we go into some of the actual material?
Dr. Baugh,
Yes.
are there online office hours if we run into any questions?
Oh, good. That's a good question. Generally, I try to leave some time within the class period, like especially near the end, to answer questions as well. If you have, most students will send me a question over email and we can usually resolve it that way. But sometimes if you have a question that like we send a couple emails back and forth and you're still not understanding it, I will set up a Zoom meeting with you at some point if it's needed. But I do try to leave enough time within the class period in most cases so that we can talk about stuff at the end. If you have something that's more private, we can always move it off to a private Zoom meeting or something like that, or an email is usually how I handle that. All right, any other questions? If you want to hit the raise your hand button, you should have access to the hand button. If anyone has any questions. Don't see any questions. No. Everyone's happy with the syllabus. Some of you are asleep, maybe. I don't know. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is the starting out with early objects, 10th edition. That's if you have the 9th edition or something like that, it should be close enough, I would say. Or if you have another book that you just prefer, that's okay too. But I would say the Gaddis and Maganda are actually in Walter's. I think she's a newer addition to the authors. It is a very, very good. It is a very good book. So I'm glad to see a couple of you are sleeping. That's good. I have been told my voice is very, very soothing. I don't know that was the word that was used. I was told I sounded like God, what's the guy's name? He's the guy with the glasses and the red hair at Family Guy. Is it Mort? Okay, so I have been told I sound like him, which I don't think is very much of a compliment. But anyway, so the okay. Do I recommend taking notes or just referencing slides? That's entirely up to you. Whatever your best study and learning tactic or technique is, I would say go with that. Jot down questions as you go along. Having a notebook handy is kind of useful, or notebook or some sort of digital thing you can type onto or write onto, or just plain old paper. I use all of it. I use paper, I use digital stuff. Whatever makes you learn best is what I recommend. Okay, So most of this is probably, many of you are familiar with this stuff, but hopefully maybe we can uh, go into a little more details in some areas, or just make sure we're all on the same page. Because some of you I know have had programming courses before, some with me, and that's fine. And then some of you are maybe trembling in your boots, hoping that you're going to be able to, do okay in this class. And some of you are maybe aren't into computer science or software engineering, and you're maybe nervous about this as your first programming class. I'm just telling you to take a deep breath, calm down. It's not going to be a big deal. Just make sure you listen, take notes. Don't tell yourself I can't. That's probably the worst thing that students do, is they get it in their head that I'm not cut out for this, I can't do it. Don't put that in your head, because that's going to make it more difficult to learn. So just and there are going to be aspects of the course, the topic, that you don't like, other aspects that you probably do. That's with any topic you take, so just be aware of that as well. So why do we program? So we'll start at the very, very fundamentals. What's a computer? Programmable machine. I'm not going to read all the details on every slide, so don't freak out or fall asleep, but we will use this to kind of guide, so I make sure I cover everything. So we'll talk about computers. Programmable machine, designed to follow instructions. That's a very, very general term to describe what is a computer. We know that we have software, obviously, that's the instructions that tell the computer what to do. And a programmer is the person that writes the instructions that tells the computer what to do. So it also involves designing sometimes, creating, and also testing. So a lot of people are really focused on the whole creating part. So they like software construction or implementation, but a lot of people don't think through designing or testing. Okay. When you first start programming, it's okay to kind of focus a little bit more on the creating part, because you're learning a lot of new things, but also keep design and testing in mind. And what this means is, designing is what you do before you start writing the code. And then testing is what you do while you're writing the code, as you get different parts written and you want to make sure they work correctly. You test them as you go on. There are actually people that really love design, and they don't like the coding aspect as much, so they like the design part. So they might become software designers or game designers, or they might become software architects, although they are generally very good at coding too. They look at the overall system, the big picture. If you take the systems development and UML course here, that is a very good course, and it involves design. How do we look at the system as a whole, and how do we put the different parts together? How do we zoom in and zoom out at the system, meaning the thing we're trying to design? Creating is generally looked at as writing the actual code. Testing is making sure that code runs properly. Okay. So without programmers, there's no programs. So without programs, the computer doesn't do anything. It's just a doorstop at that point. So we consider programming, most people consider programming an art and a science. It does involve some degree of creativity. A lot of people think that computer scientists lack creativity, and that's not always the case. We may not be, we may not be drinking a kale latte sitting by a beach drawing, but in the same respect, you do have to have some creativity in order to put stuff together. Some of that might be art. If you have an art skill also, then that's very valuable for people who can both program and do art skills. You might end up bridging these two, become the person that's the bridge, say in a company, between two different departments. In some cases, you might end up being one of the people that helps bridge that, or the only person that helps bridge that, because a lot of people are very into art but don't like technology as much, or aren't as comfortable with more engineering type technology. And then on the other side, the technical focus, some of the people on the technical side don't like dealing with the art. Making a game is an art. Yeah, that's true. Game development, also, just like any software, involves different people in different functions depending on how large your team is. If you're an independent developer, you have to be the designer, Sometimes the artist, unless you outsource it or purchase art, music, things like that. So a lot of people, it's definitely a creative thing that you have to do. The person that actually started the company that makes a lot of the games that I play didn't originally know how to program. He actually just started modding and tinkering around with other games and ended up making a living out of it, making a game company and very popular games that people play. So games are a type of software. Websites are software. Mobile apps that you have on your phone, whether they're a game or a productivity app or a communications app, those are all software. Someone had to write them at some point. So artistry is organization of the tasks that the program performs, how information is displayed, how the user interacts with the program. There's also science and engineering in programming as well. So understanding the language used to write the program, that involves the syntax and the semantics, meaning the grammar of the language is the syntax, and also the semantics are what does it mean when I tell it to do this and this and this. Understanding how to test the program and to change it if it doesn't work as intended. So these are very, very important skills to learn. Understanding a language is actually very, very important. A lot of people think, oh, that's not as big or not as important. I can just, outsource that part, but that's generally not the case. You have to be very, very adept at working with a language in order to succeed generally as a programmer or researcher or software engineer in industry. It's kind of like your degree of understanding of the language also can help you be an asset to other developers, because there's a lot of situations where you might be working in industry and someone might know one language but not be as good in another, and then you might know a language and not be as good at the one that they're real good at, and everyone complements each other in that respect. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. But if you're going into programming, you have to know that it's lifelong learning. You're always going to be learning something. It's not, you didn't major in 18th century British literature. We don't update that very frequently. You're majoring in something that is constantly changing. The fundamentals, for the most part, are going to always stay the same. So when you know that, you're giving yourself a good platform to learn new technologies as they come along. But it's not a static, what we would consider a static discipline where things don't change, because they change frequently. It is. See, computer science is a lifetime commitment. Okay, so it's like if you get a cat, you could be allergic to it too. So just make sure you're not allergic to CIS. It's more like owning a turtle, because it's going to be around for like 60 years unless you forget to feed it. So hardware, physical components of the computer, and we also have software, which are the things that you can't touch. So the hardware are tangible, and it doesn't mean you can like touch them directly all the time. I wouldn't recommend opening the cover on your computer and just jamming your hand in there while it's running. But those parts inside the case that protect the parts inside of it are called hardware. The main hardware components that are very common, necessary, are central processing unit. That's the CPU. Main memory is RAM. So when people say, if someone asks you how much memory does your computer have, a lot of people misunderstand this in like regular everyday conversation. A lot of people think when you say how much memory do you have, I've had people in the family and stuff say stuff like, oh, I have they told me my hard drive was a terabyte. Well, that's not what I'm asking. Okay, I'm asking you how much memory do you have. Okay, now memory, if not given any context, if I don't say secondary memory or long-term memory device or secondary storage device, if I don't say that and I just say memory, I'm talking about RAM. So those are two different types of storage in many respects. So the RAM is what we call volatile. Okay, by volatile, I don't mean that it's going to slash your tires or call your mother dirty names. What volatile means is if the power goes out, it means you're going to lose whatever's in memory. Okay, you're going to lose whatever's there if it has not been saved to some sort of secondary storage device. Main memory is electrical entirely. Secondary storage devices, up until recently, all of them were electromechanical, meaning they had the spinning platter and the moving arm and all that other stuff. That's still the most common hard drive for larger hard drives. But now we have something called solid state devices, which are actually in some ways closer to main memory. They're not quite as fast as main memory, but they're way faster than the hard drives that have the platter that has to spin. Since those are mechanical, then they have to move physically without just electricity. So they're actually spinning and they're moving an arm, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. That actually causes it to be very, very slow compared to the central processing unit and compared to main memory. If we compare what reading and writing something off of the hard drive, if it's a spinning platter, for example, the standard hard drive, if you compare what a read and a write, even if it's very, very quick to the human eye or the human experience, it's an eternity compared to how fast the central processing unit goes. And it's also very, very slow compared to what main memory could do. So whatever we're working on at a given time goes into main memory. And then what's actually being processed at any given point is going through the central processing unit. When you are working in a programming language and you create what we're going to learn about as variables and constants and instructions, even those are going to live in main memory. Okay. And then when they're actually being executed, they run through the central processing unit, or in some cases, depending on what it is, it might run through a specialized type of processing unit called a graphics processing unit. But that's still a processing unit. Again, secondary storage devices. The most popular are still the electromechanical hard drives. The solid state devices or solid state drives are just electrical. They're not mechanical. They don't have moving parts, so they're way faster than the ones with the spinning drives. Let me see here. Give me just a second. I got to be careful here. I type hard drive now. I typed hard disk once and spelled disk wrong, and it wasn't a good day for class. Okay, so this right here is the spinning platter, regular old hard drive. This arm right here is called the read-write arm, and it's on a swiveling point right here. There's actually several of them, and then this platter, actually there's several platters going down, and they go in here and they go back and forth very, very quickly. And then this thing spins extremely quickly as well. We're talking like, 7,200 times a minute, things like that. That sounds incredibly fast to us, right? But to a computer, that's actually an eternity. It's much slower. Whereas the SSD drives, solid state drives, look, pretty much like this. They're not going to be, they're pretty much just they're chips basically instead of moving parts. And they basically hold data in them. Some of them are formed to look like, that's probably for a laptop. Some of them are formed to look like RAM sticks. So they're actually very, very similar to that. But the only difference is that when the power goes out, they still store electricity to keep the data where it belongs. So it's not volatile. That's a relatively new technology compared to what we have had in the past. And that's actually very, very, very cool. That's why usually if you get a computer, even if it's a relatively inexpensive new computer, most of them now have a solid state drive on them, even if it's small, so that they can store the operating system on it. And the reason for that is it'll help your computer boot way faster. So if you know what it's like to have a computer that did not have a solid state drive, or maybe you currently have a computer that does not have a solid state drive, you can turn it on. Even the faster ones, you can turn it on and kind of walk away and make a sandwich while it's booting. So Yes, the NVMe boot times are life-changing. They definitely are. The solid state drives are pretty impressive. So allowing your computer to boot in a couple, just a few seconds. I don't think I've ever waited longer than 10 seconds. So sacrificed your OS boot time for game boot time. Well, you have to have priorities. I don't like waiting on the thing to my computer just turn on, so that irritates me the most. So I generally try to keep a lot of solid state available to myself. The stuff that I don't use as often, I might keep on an electromechanical drive. I'm trying to remember. I don't know if I even have I might have all solid state on this one. I don't remember. Anyway, input devices and output devices. So input devices are things that send data into the computer. For example, if I move my mouse, it's sending signals into the computer, and I'm actually seeing it on my monitor, which is an output device, because that's the computer sending data out. You're seeing it on your monitors, which I assume you're seeing it on your monitors. And that's your output device. Some devices are both input and output devices. If you think about your mobile phone, pretty much all of them, except for the extremely rare basic flip phones that still exist, the majority of phones are smartphones, and they almost all of them have a digitizer, which takes input when you touch it. So it's got a touch screen, and it also sends data as output so you can see what you're interacting with. So it's kind of like the monitor. So they have capacitive touch. When you touch the screen, since as humans we have electricity running through our bodies, a little tiny bit of an electrical field around us. That's not a philosophical debate. That's actually scientific. We do have a little bit of electricity going through us. Most of these screens are capacitive touch, which means when your finger interacts with the screen, it knows that there's an electrical signal touching it. So it knows that's where you're touching it. It provides an interruption, and that's how it interprets your interaction with it. That's why most of the screens are not very good if you're wearing a very heavily insulated glove or something like that. Now, there are different technologies that try to accommodate for that, but still most of them are just basic capacitive touch. So this is hardware. These are the hardware parts. More main hardware components: drawing pads, cameras, digital cameras, scanners. The keyboard and the mouse are both input, and you have output devices like your speakers, your printer, your monitors or monitor are output devices. And then again, some things are both. Central processing unit has two major components to it. It has what's called the control unit and the ALU. Control unit is for making decisions on the computer, and the ALU is what does computations. So CPU's role, the CPU is often thought of as the brain of the computer, the hardware brain. It does what's called the fetch, decode, execute cycle. So it fetches or gets the next program instruction from main memory. Now that corresponds to RAM, right? That's the hardware component it corresponds to. But when there's electricity in it, it has signals basically embedded at different parts, and it grabs that next programming instruction from main memory, and then it interprets the instruction to generate a signal, and then execute is routing the signal to the appropriate component to perform the operation. So whether that's printing something to a console, sending something to an actual printer, sending data over a network, sending something to the hard drive, writing, reading, whatever. It may have to send data somewhere to do that, and instructions. Main memory holds the program instructions and data. It's volatile. Again, it's erased when the program terminates or the computer's turned off. And it's generally also called RAM, or random access memory, because the CPU can access data and instructions from any memory location. You can think of the CPU as a very, very, very advanced and smart brain for your computer, but it lacks long-term memory. It could be that really, really, really super smart friend you have that's kind of absent-minded and doesn't think of things. doesn't remember things from 2 hours ago. And then the RAM is basically kind of like their work desk or notebook that they can take notes in and work off of so that they don't forget things. So they access it when they need it. So main memory organization, bit, is the smallest piece of memory. It's a signal for on or off. Basically, it's an electrical charge. And bit stands for binary digit. That's why it's called a bit, because in let me see here. What are we going to do? We'll do it this way. Okay, so here's paint. If I have different, here, wait, let's do this part. Let's do it this way. So I might have the decimal system, right? I have a drawing pad, but I'm going to use my mouse since the drawing pad's over there and I'm over here. Okay, so we know that this number right here is 2,157 because we've grown up with base 10 being our primary base that we work with, okay, pretty much exclusively for most people. So you have this is position 0, position 1, position 2, and position 3, or that's why we call that the particular digit, or we call this base 10, right? Base 10. It's also called, so 10 is deca. Oh, this is horrible. Let me just do this. That's nicer. Okay, so deca, right, means 10. Decimal system, base 10. Why do you suppose, and I want people to raise their hand using the little software component. If you don't see a raise hand option, you can use your thumbs up and I'll call on you if you want to answer it. Why do you think we chose, or why do you think that our predecessors primarily, there are exceptions, which we'll talk about briefly, but historically, why do you think pretty much every civilization that developed any kind of math, which was most of them, used a base 10 system? Why do you think that's the case, Mr. Brodus?
Yeah, it's because we have 10 fingers.
Yeah, pretty much every human on the planet, not all, but pretty much every human has 10 fingers. And it's easier to count on. So even people who were, you didn't have to be a math genius to know that, okay, I'm trading 5 apples for 2 baby lambs or something like that, right? That would probably be a good steal. But that's basically why most societies developed a base 10, okay, system. There are exceptions. The Mayans developed the base 20 system, which is similar in the fact that if you're in a very warm environment and you're basically the most powerful civilization in town, and you're in a very hot environment, your toes are exposed most of the time, and you can use those for counting too. So that's probably why they developed base 20. And then you've got the Babylonians who had base 60, but that's, I think, because they were doing a lot of hashish, but that's another story. So the Babylonians also came up with the 360-degree circle, which is because they thought there were 360 days in a year. They were close. They did a lot of huge brilliant mathematical strives in the Babylonian Empire. They were off slightly on how many days there were in a year, but that's the only reason we believe that we have 360 degrees in a circle. They divided them into segments of six segments of 60, and came up with arc, and they did a whole lot of really great mathematics. But if we're ever visited by aliens, it's very unlikely they're going to understand degrees. So make sure you use radians. I'm just letting everyone know. Okay, so in case I'm gone or I get abducted by the aliens and they want to talk to you about circles, just make sure you talk using radians, not degrees. So why then, if we have this decimal system, we've got these different segments right here. This is decimal digit at 0. So that's the 7. So that's 7 times 10 to the 0. 10 to the 0 is 1, right? Anything to the power of 0 except arguably 0. But 10 to the power of 0, 5 to the power of 0, 100 million to the power of 0, they all equal 1 by definition, right? So you take that 7 that's in there and multiply it by that right there, and you get 7. Okay, that's, no surprise there. If I have 10 to the 1 here, this is my exponent. That's the position number 1 here. There's 5 there. Any number to the power 1 is itself. So this is the tens position. In elementary school, you were probably taught this is the hundreds position. It's actually the 10 squareds position, but that's where the hundreds comes from, right? So there's 1 in there. And then there's the 10 to the 3 power, which is 1,000. So this is the thousands, and that's 2157. So you have 2,000s, 100, 5 tens, or 5 tens, and then 7 ones. So if we put all this together, we get 2,157. If you look at each of these, we would call these a decimal digit. Okay, decimal digit. Now, if we keep going, if we have a different system down here, we might have the binary system, which is base 2. So you thought those were fractions at first. Yeah, I apologize. This is not a fraction. This is a platform on which the number is sitting, and then I'm articulating that number with this right here. So I'm sorry if I confused anyone. So yeah, these are not fractions. All right, so in base 10, what is the highest number? Raise your hand. What is the highest number that I can go up to in any individual digit? So you can go from 0 up to, Mr. Phillips?
9.
9, because it's 1 less than the name of the base. That's what we go up to. Once we have to go to an actual 10, we have to switch to the next position. Now, in base 2, I would start at 0 again, of course. But if I start at 0, what's the highest number? It would be 1 less than the name of the system, which is binary. So it's base 2. So that means I can go up to only 1, right? So I can only put zeros and ones here. So that means if I have something like 1101 right there, that is a binary number. Each of these is a binary digit or a bit, right? So that's a bit. I have 1 in the 2 to the 0's place. What's 2 to the 0? 2 to the 0 is 1, right? So 1 times 1 is, in decimal, we would say that's a 1, right? We don't have anything in the 2 to the 1's place. 2 to the 1 is 2, but it's 0 times 2, so that's going to be a 0. What's 2 cubed? Anyone? Just yell it out. What's 2 to the 3? It's 8. It's 8. To the 4th is 16. We're almost there. So this is the 8th position. Okay, so 1 times 8. Math is hard. Thank you. So 1 times 8 is 8. Okay, and then we have 1 in the 16th position. That is, oh, I screwed up. Aha, I see why everyone was angry at me. Okay, here we go. This is a 3. That's a 2. So I'm going to say that that's wrong. Okay, so 2 to the power 2 is 4. 1 times 4 is 4. There's the 4. And then we have 1 in the 8th position. 2 to the 3, that's 8. I knew that didn't look right. Okay, so now we have, you're right, math is hard. That's what just happened. Okay, so 8 plus 4 is 12, plus 1 is 13, right? So 13 in decimal is 1101 in binary. Okay, now if we didn't have 10 fingers, 10 toes, as most of humanity does, then we may have, let's say we were, if we were lobster people with claws, we probably would have developed a base 4 system, closing claw on each hand. If we were dolphins, we probably would be, talking in binary, because you've got 1 flipper on each side. You have to count in binary. That's why dolphins are so smart, because they use binary, just like computers. That was kind of made up. But anyway, we've got this. I'm going to now move on to why do we use the bit? The bit is high and low charges. So we just represent it as humans as ones and zeros. It's usually a high and low charge. I wouldn't say a negative charge necessarily. That's not necessarily the case, but I would say high and low are usually used to represent zeros and ones. A byte is actually the smallest addressable unit of memory. So if you're ever asked on a test or in a class or at a job interview, what is the smallest addressable unit of memory? The answer is not bit, it's byte. It has to be 8 consecutive bits. So just like I just drew on that paint diagram, I had 1, 2, 3, 4 digits. It would be 8 digits worth of binary information. Okay, so there are millions or even billions of bytes of memory in a computer. Okay, definitely billions. All right. Secondary storage holds data when the computer is not running or when the computer is turned off. Now, is the only form of secondary storage a disk drive, either an SD or SSD or a mechanical drive? And the answer is no. You also have flash drives, which use more of an electrical rather than electromechanical form of memory. SD cards or USB flash drives, those are very common to keep data on. Optical drives are still in use, not as much as they used to be, but compact discs or digital video discs are both optical. So with disk drives, if you have the spinning platter, it uses magnets and it uses metal oxide covered semiconductive material on the top, and it changes basically the direction of polarity on different parts of the disk. And that's how it determines whether that polarity means a 0 or a 1 at that spot. On optical, it basically is burning an impression onto the disk using a laser, and then it uses a weaker laser to either, when it hits the spot, if it's reflective, it knows it's, say, a 1. And if it bounces off, it's reflective, it's a 1. If it doesn't get a signal back, it knows that there's been a burned section there. So that means that it's a 0 because the signal doesn't return. So that uses optical technology. You could write bits and bytes on duct tape, okay? There's nothing magical about any of these formats. It's just that some of them are better at holding more data. Okay, input devices, not too complicated here. We've got keyboards and mouse, touchscreen, stuff like that. Output devices, computer screen, printer, etc. So we talked about hardware. Now we want software, right? So software involves system software that involves the operating systems and then the programs that are used to help you manage the computer hardware and run the computer. I don't know that I agree with them that a software development tool is a system software. I don't know that I agree with that. I'd probably still say that's application software, but that's kind of their, you know, whatever. That's we can agree to disagree on that. I would agree that operating system absolutely is the quintessential example of system software. I mean, the words in it already. So that controls the operation of the computer. It's kind of the software brain, whereas the CPU is more of the hardware brain. Manages connected devices and access to storage devices and allows the programs to run. The utility programs support, these are support programs that enhance the computer. So virus scanners, data backup, file compression. I might even take them to task on that, but I'm not going to really cause a hoopla over it. Programming and programs rather, and programming language. This is a program's just the set of instructions directing a computer to perform a task, and then the language is the whatever language is used to write the program, right? Yeah, BIOS could be considered a very low-level type of system software because it is an operating system software. It's basic input out, the basic integrated operating system. I don't remember what that actually stands for. BIOS, I forget what it stands for. Let me see here. Blah 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 blah. Acronym. Yeah, basic input output. I was right the first time. Okay, so yeah, it basically does act as a bootstrap for the, that's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure because it had OS and I was like, I can't remember if it has operating system on it. It's basic input output system, but it is a very, very basic and rudimentary in many respects operating system because you can change settings on hardware and things like that. So I would definitely include that in system software. So what's an algorithm? So an algorithm, not to be confused with a logarithm, an algorithm is a set of well-defined steps to perform a task or solve a problem. Some people would include the word a finite set of well-defined steps to perform a task or solve a problem. That might be an important distinction. Because if you have something that keeps on going and, you know, or something that's well-defined or not well-defined, or something that doesn't solve the problem, then those couldn't really be considered algorithms. Order is important. If I tell you to, if I tell you the instructions for driving, and I tell you to start the car and then release the, you know, put it in reverse and then get in the car, it's going to be a bad set of instructions, right? There may be some problems with that. So the order of what you tell the computer to do does actually matter, right? Languages, we have low level, which is used for communication with computer hardware directly. Not very easy for a person to read, and then high level languages are closer to human language. This is a this looks like a cut and dry black and white summary. It's not really that way. It is more a continuum. The lowest level programming language would be the actual machine code, the zeros and ones that ultimately the zeros and ones that the processor understands. And then there are also low level language or lower level languages like assembly language, which is higher level than machine code, but it is also it's better but still difficult for humans to read. And then you start getting into higher level languages like C++ and Java and Kotlin and Swift and things like that. Python. So from a high level program to an executable file, so you create a file and you want the statements in source code. You want these statements in source code, and then a file would be the source file. Often we call that the source file. We want to run the preprocessor. That's a part of the compilation system that runs through to convert the source file directives to source code. So if I say, hey, in my file at the top, I want you to include this other file, it has to write all of that into the file we're compiling first. So it basically it writes it there, and then that part gets compiled. So this is very C++ focused here. And then you run the compiler on your source code, which is close to English. The computer doesn't understand it, right? The computer does not understand English or it doesn't even understand C++. It has to have it in machine code or object code, which is stored in an object file. That could be a DLL. It could be a static library. It could be an exe file. You've probably seen those. The compiler converts the source program into these machine instructions. Okay, so we've got some questions. Bit shifting for efficiency is a high level is a good. I would say, yeah, it's still in a high level language, but it's a very, very low level technique. If you do bit shifting, you can, they used to do it a lot, especially in game development, to try to make things faster. They would shift the bits. Like if you had a number and you shifted it to the right, that's the equivalent of dividing it by 2 very quickly. And if you shift it to the left, it's the same as multiplying it by 2 very quickly. So if instead of performing a multiplication operation, it actually optimizes it. But really, most high-level languages and compilers actually do that optimization for you now. So it's not usually necessary. Is the preprocessor similar to the JVM? No. The preprocessor, the JVM for Java, the Java virtual machine, when you compile a Okay, like we're talking about here in C++, when you compile the source code, it turns into machine code, right? So it turns into the code that the computer you're on can interpret, okay? So if I make an exe file on Windows, I can compile it and it's ready for Windows, and I can execute it on Windows and it opens up on Windows. I would have to take that source code and actually compile it on, say, a Mac or a Linux machine that has maybe a different architecture here or some other machine over there. I would have to convert those by using the compiler on those systems to produce the machine code that those computers can understand. But at the end of the day, my objective with C++ is to get the code into machine code. That's what the compiler does. We don't need to know that complication. Now, what JVM does is when you compile a Java application, it converts it into something called bytecode. And then that bytecode runs on the Java virtual machine. So the Java virtual machine, as far as it's concerned, the bytecode is the machine code, and the Java virtual machine is an actual machine. So it's actually kind of a brilliant thing, because you can take that bytecode and it's platform independent. You can move it to different machines. And since the JVM on each of those machines is specifically coded so that it works properly on that machine, as far as Java is concerned, Java machine code, quote unquote, which is bytecode, only works on one machine. It works on the JVM, and that's the only machine it works on. But since each platform has its own JVM, it can run Java applications. So that's why it's called a virtual machine. As far as it's considered, it's a computer that understands machine code, but it doesn't understand x86 or ARM processor code or x64. It doesn't understand all these actual machine codes. It only understands bytecode. So in that respect, it is. The preprocessor, on the other hand, loads in a completely different file when you do an include. So if you say, I need to access this particular object in C++, so I need to load in this file. Hey, load it in for me. But I don't want to see the clutter while I'm coding, so I don't want to do like a copy paste that's sloppy. I'm just going to do an include and then load it when you need it. So it's a little bit different idea.
So does that mean that C++ is less portable?
C++ is the machine code is less portable. Yes, the machine code is not portable across all platforms. The source code, in most cases, except for tiny little problems here and there that have to be accommodated for, can generally be compiled. If let's say I write a simple program in C++, relatively simple, it doesn't have to be crazy simple, but if I run one that doesn't have any hardware specific commands in it, and I write that code and I run it on my Windows machine, everything works fine. I can copy that file over to my System 76 Ubuntu machine that runs. So that's a kind of, well, arguably a kind of Linux. Okay, so I can compile it on that machine using the exact same C++ code, the high level code, and the compiler on that machine will spit out a different executable file that will then run on the Linux machine just fine. But they are different, same source code, but different executables. That's different from Java, where you can take the actual bytecode and run it on each system. But you can't run it on each system unless those systems have the JVM installed, which is just another thing that you have to depend on. So that's why some people would prefer not to use Java in that case. Okay, so high-level program to an executable file. Source code, hello.cpp, goes into the preprocessor. The modified source code gets spit out. We don't usually see that. But what it is it's our code plus all the code it had to include that we told it to include. And then it goes through the compiler, turns into something the computer can understand, the OBJ, and then goes into a linker. It could also be a DLL that could be included. This is a static library on Windows, but you've also got DLL files, which are a dynamically linked library, so they're only loaded when needed. But the OBJ file would go through a linker, and then it would spit out, say, an executable like hello.exe, and then we can run it. There are many different software development systems that provide an IDE, or integrated development environment. An IDE has the following: a text editor, so you can actually write your source code, a compiler, which converts your source code in C++, for example, into something the computer can actually understand, the machine code. It has a debugger to help you test and debug or remove problems from your code, and other supporting utilities. So, sometimes performance utilities and rapid prototyping environments and things like that. All kinds of different stuff. And a user interface that ties them all together. There are common elements in most programming languages. So you typically have keywords, which are words that the programming language has deemed specific to that language, and you can't reuse them for something else. Programmer defined identifiers, that would be like names of variables or functions, which we'll get to all of that later on if you're not familiar with those terms. But it's things that you use in the program. You have to give them names to know what to refer to them as. For example, if I want to make a little box that I want to put someone's name in, I could call that box name, and that would be a programmer defined identifier. Now, since it has to contain just someone's name, I could use a data type called string. If I wanted to put another box where that person's age is sitting, then I just need an integer or a whole number. So I put, let's say 26 as the age inside that little box. That box might be named age, but its data type might be int, int for int. And that would be a keyword in C++. I can't use int again as a programmer defined identifier because it's reserved as a keyword. There are operators, which are like plus and minus and multiply. So the star, the divide symbol, greater than, less than, equal to, those are all things you perform operations with. And then punctuation, things like semicolons at the end of statements. We'll see what that looks like. And then in general, syntax. So syntax are, again, the grammar of the language that you're working in. And sometimes people would use this more generally to refer to everything altogether as the syntax. So here's an example. This is a very simple program right here. This includes IOStream, and you put a using namespace directive. Some people are against this. I think it's a dumb battle most of the time. So I would usually use this, but it genuinely doesn't matter. I think a lot of people make a bigger deal about it than it should be. But if you're trying to really have an optimized experience, or you think this is, you've got a huge program you're working on, you're going to have a lot of naming conflicts, then don't do this. But in most cases, this is generally acceptable. But this is what the preprocessor is going to read is up here. You're telling it, hey, I know you've got this thing called IOStream. I need that because I have to access this thing down here called cout, and also this, this symbol right here. Otherwise, my program's not going to know what those things mean. So I would like you to include this input-output stream library that someone else was kind enough to write for us, or probably several someone else's were kind enough to write for us. I would like to include the contents of that before any of my code so that I can use it. Now, you won't see it get included. You're not going to see thousands of lines of code, but it's going to include the contents as needed so that your program will work properly. This is a very basic program. Right here, you see that we're creating three numbers here. They are each data type double, which basically just means they're kind of using them weird here, but a double could actually have a decimal place in them. So 5.7 or 6.8 or something like that. So they are declaring num1, num2, and sum, sum. Notice the commas, right? And of these three that were declared, only one of them has been initialized on the same line, or the same statement, because there's one semicolon here. They put it on 2 lines. It could just as well go up here, though. It doesn't really matter. But here, I think they're just trying to keep it a little cleaner looking. But this right here is initialized to the value 5, or given an initial value. This right here is an initialization on a separate statement. So num2 was declared in this statement with double num2, but it's actually initialized or assigned its initial value on that line. Now, down here, we have another line where we say sum equals num1 plus num2, that is an initialization also, because it's the first time sum is ever given a value. And we say sum equals, this is the assignment, this is the assignment operator. It assigns a value to this variable sum, and it takes the values of num1 added to num2 and stores it back into sum, and then prints out the sum this way. We say cout, and then what they're doing here is they're saying, this is called the stream insertion operator. You don't need to memorize that right now, but this is the stream insertion operator, and we're saying all the data is going towards, generally we use the mnemonic console out or console output. I think it actually means character output, but console output is what most people think of it as. The sum is a string, so it's just a bunch of characters, and then there's a space here, and then we want to separate that from the number we just calculated right here, so that it prints all as one like fluid system here. So if I have Visual Studio open, which I do, I'm going to actually create a new project. I'm going to show you how do you actually write a simple program. So we're going to do new and new project. In Visual Studio, make sure that you have it set to C++. Don't set it to another language or you're going to have a bad day. C++, and if you don't see several options under here, that means you probably configured C++ wrong. So you would want to make sure that you at least can see empty project. We could do console app, but we're going to do empty project. Is it equivalent to debug.log? Do you mean cout? COUT? Cout is more like console.write. Okay, or it's console.write in C# or system.println or print, system.print in Java. Okay, so empty project right here. I could put it under repos. I think what I'm going to do though is I'm going to actually create a nice little folder for us. I'll call it workdir for working directory. That's where we're going to put our stuff. We'll let me see, what is this? We'll just say week 1 examples W22. Okay, so it gives me an empty project because that's what I asked for. But you will notice that it is kind of segmented into different parts here. This is how Visual Studio does it. This isn't just a C++ thing. This is a kind of a Visual Studio thing. The solution can contain one or more projects, but in our case, I think for pretty much everything we do during the semester, and probably about 85 to 90% of anything you would do, well, I wouldn't say in industry, but you probably focus on one project at a time. This one solution is going to contain one or more projects, but we're generally just going to work with one project. We're just going to use one project. And then that project contain any number of dependencies and references. You'll notice it doesn't have any references or anything. Source files, header files, resource files, all kinds of stuff we can put here. And the way we're going to start is we're going to go into source file and go to add new item. Make sure you're under Visual C++, and you notice I have C++ file, header file, C++ class, C++ module interface, unit. The thing we're going to need is just for right now is C++ file.cpp. That's the most common. The default name it gives it is source.cpp. I typically change that to main.cpp, but it doesn't matter if you call it sausage.cpp. It doesn't really matter. I would say to keep it organized, call it main.cpp if it's where your main file or main function is going to live. So hit add, and there we go. This is our, I hope that's big enough to see. This is our source file. I'm going to include IOStream. If you don't put using namespace standard, you would have to do this, which I'll show you. This is actually the, actually we could, if we took that out, this would be the absolute simplest, pretty much the absolute simplest C++ program you should ever write or would ever write. Okay. What we're doing here is we're saying instead of Java, for Java, it would be public static void main, and then string args, well, string args, like that. So it's a little bit different in C++ generally. Now you can change the signature around a little bit, but usually we're going to do this. Some people put void main, but that's really more of a C thing, not a C++ thing. You can technically leave out the return 0 just for main, but since it returns an int, you should write it. Okay, so if you want full points, you should write it. Okay, I'll just put it that way. We're going to include IOStream. Now, a lot of people would want you to do this. Okay, so in addition to including that library, I now have access to the things that I need in order to print stuff to the console or read stuff in from the keyboard. Okay, so what I could do right now is I could put standard. I could say it's in the standard namespace, and I want cout, and I want to say hello world, like that, and then I'm going to say this. If I just do it this way, okay, in double quotes, and then run it. I'm going to build it first, build solution under build, and then give it a second. It should say build succeeded at the bottom. If you have an error, like you forgot the semicolon or something, it will tell you down here. In fact, let's look at what it does if I leave that out. You're already getting an error, and it'll usually tell you something went wrong. This right here is telling me expected a semicolon. It's pointing to this line, but you know that the error is actually caused by something earlier. It just thinks, it says there's a syntax error. It's missing a semicolon somewhere before return. So I know I have to put a semicolon in there. So I've done it. Let me build it now. And now I don't have any more errors. It says build succeeded in the far lower left corner. Then I go to debug, start without debugging. And it says hello world. Okay, now the other stuff is added by the IDE. This is not part of my program. This is just what Visual Studio is saying. Hey, everything succeeded, it's happy. But hello world is all that I saw there. Okay, now if you want, you can actually put an end line right here. And let's look at that. So that adds an extra space. Okay. Now, some compilers, some IDEs, when they print it out, if you don't put the inline, it'll have your hello world up against all the other crap that's printed out by the IDE, like right next to it, slammed up next to it. But it looks like, I think probably as of the 2022 or the 2020 version, they've added the extra new line to make it cleaned up. But a lot of times we want to add a new line character. So that's what we would do. Now, it can get a little bit tedious to type this every time you want to print something to the console. So some people might recommend you do this instead. So using standard cout, you can do it that way. And then anytime you use cout, you don't actually have to put the standard in front of it. I can use it 700,000 times and only just have this one using statement. So a lot of people would prefer that. However, Indel needs it. So I would also have to put this. Okay. And then that means I now don't have to put it down there, and I can use it whenever I want it and build it this way. But another way, and this is the way that there's controversy over, that some people are like, oh, don't ever do that, that's horrible. But I consider it a lot of times it's people making a bigger deal out of it than is the problem, especially when you're learning. I would say using namespace standard just tells it anytime you have any of these things, just assume by default it's in namespace standard. If you have another namespace you're dealing with, then you can always put the, if I'm using the sausage namespace, I can always just put sausage : in front of whatever I'm working with. Okay. So there's hello world. If I want to, let me see, what did they do? They did like something with math, didn't they? Okay. So they used a double. I'm going to use an int. I'm going to say num1, and you could put num1, num2, and sum like that. I typically declare my variables on separate lines just because I consider it cleaner, but that's really a matter of preference. So the sum of those numbers. So let's say I want num1 set to 100. Num2 is set to 200. And then sum is set to num1 plus num2. And then I want to say maybe hello world. And then on the next line, I want to say the sum is, and then I'm going to put sum like that. Okay. And I build it. And then I run it. And give it a second. Okay, sum is 300, which is what we expect because it's 100 plus 200. Now, some of you might be chomping at the bit thinking, wait a minute, I've done Java before. Why do we need this indel thing? What about \n? Well, you can use \n also. Okay, so I could actually do another hello world statement here if I want, or hello there, just to distinguish the two. And I'll put a \n inside there, and I don't need the indel. So you can put it inside the double quotes as part of the string. And this is the exact same thing it does in Java. It's the escape character for new line. The escape sequence for new line, I should say. Okay, so hello world has the end line after it, so it pushes that to the next line. Hello there has a new line, so it pushes the sum to the next line, and then it has a end line, so it adds an extra line of space. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, no questions. All right, so keywords, also called reserved words. Some that you would see would be the using keyword, the namespace keyword, and the int keyword on main. As a note, in case you're not familiar with what main does, main is what we call the entry point of the application. So what happens is when you say I'm running or executing or starting my application, it will look at main first, and it will follow it by default in sequence. It'll say, oh, declare variable, declare variable, declare variable, set variable value, perform this operation num1 plus num2, and then return the result, store that, because I have an equal sign there, store that into sum, print out hello world followed by a new line, print out hello there followed by a new line, and then print out sum is followed by whatever is in the variable sum, followed by the inline object, the inline character, which would be a new line. And then it goes to the end of the program, and then that tells it, hey, we succeeded, the program's done, we're done. Okay, so that goes line by line, but main is the entry point of the application. This is our preprocessor directive that was mentioned earlier. Again, that was the one that's going to import all the contents of the stuff that we need from IOStream. Okay. Michael, do you have a question? You're unmuted, but I don't hear anything. So maybe you have your mic muted? No? Okay. All right. Okay, that's no problem. It's no problem. I just didn't want to skip over someone if they had a question. Return zero, well, it's not really a reading process. You're talking about the program. It ends the program execution. What it does is it tells the operating system everything succeeded. Zero means success. It means there were no errors. And return zero is just the default of what the int main does. It's basically just to say the program is done now. Right. Okay, so programmer defined identifiers, these would be names made up by the programmer. They're not part of the C++ language, and they're used to represent various things, such as variables. And those variables represent memory locations. So example in a program would be like double num1, or in my case, int num1. So this is called a, in fact, if we want to do, here, let's do something a little bit different here. Instead of num2 being 200 down there, I'm going to set it to 200 up here. So this right here, the num1 by itself, this is just called a declaration of the variable. Okay, so it has an identifier is num1, and then what's the data type? What's the type of data? Anyone want to raise their hand or type in the chat? What's the data type of num1? Int, right? So it's an integer. It's int is its data type, and which represents an integer. That means what type of data does that variable hold? right? So variable is kind of like the little box I was describing earlier. The name of that box, what I refer to that specific box as, is its identifier or its variable name. And then the value I put in it is the data or the value that's inside of it. Now this one is a little bit different. This one has the declaration, but also with initialization, which is the first assignment, the first value assignment. So this is called the assignment operator, the equals symbol. And I am assigning the value 200 to this variable named num2. Okay, so this one contains both a declaration right here, oops, declaration right here, and also the initialization of the value. This next one, sum, only contains the declaration. Okay, this right here is an initialization of num1 to the value 100. Now, what happens if I set num2 equal to 500 now? Is that an initialization? The answer is no, because it already had its value initialized because it was given the initial value of 200. We would just say this is assignment to the value 500, right? So we're actually changing the value of num2. So by the time this is performed, it will actually be 500 instead of 200. So the 200 never actually got used. So if I run this, it should say 600, right? Yeah. Good. Okay. What do we have here? So used to perform operations on the data. Many type of operators. We have arithmetic operators and the assignment operators. Those you should be very, very familiar with. So you have the arithmetic operators, plus, minus, multiply, and divide. Okay. There are others. There are relational operators and logic operators that we'll talk about later at a later lecture. But for right now, just know that the arithmetic operators or arithmetic operators, whichever way you want to go with that, is plus, minus, multiply, divide. And then you have the assignment operator, which is equals. It's a good idea to declare and initialize the same in the same statement. It's generally a matter of preference. A lot of times in C++, though, it is very common for people to set the values of the variables initially to 0, but that's kind of a preference, really. Java, if you don't initialize a variable, it won't let you use it. C++ will let you use it. And the problem with that is it could contain what we call garbage data. It could just have, it could be a number from someone else's application that was left over at some point. It could be just some garbage that was left there from, something that was written in memory. It could be the remnants, it could be a value representing a pixel on that zombie you just blew away on one of your games. It could just be sitting there in the memory and it, trying to reuse it, but it's still got garbage in there. So a lot of people will initialize all of them, but I don't really care. Honestly, it doesn't really matter to me. Another thing to be aware of when we have an operation like this. So you'll notice I have sum equals num plus 2. So there's actually a lot going on here. The thing that goes on first is the addition operation, because this equals can't do anything unless it gets a result value from here. Okay, so what happens is when the compiler is going through, it reads this, it says, oh, sum equals, oh good, what's on the right side? When it sees on the right side that there's actually an expression and not just a single variable, it has to wait until this expression has done its work first. Okay, and this could be arbitrarily complex. It could be like, times 5 divided by, 3 times num2 or whatever. I mean, we could have all kinds of stuff, right? But in this case, what we would call this is called the addition operator. Okay, so it's an operator. It's one of the arithmetic operators. You've got addition operator, subtraction operator, multiplication operator, and division operator, and the assignment operator right there. Now, the things that it operates on the variables num1 and num2 are called its operands. Okay, so plus is operator. Num1, num2 are operands, right? Okay. And furthermore, after it's done doing its operation, it say returns the number 600, value 600, then you have the equals operator, the sum operand, and then the result from this whole thing is also an operand. It would be 600 at this point. So the operands are the things that the operators apply to. That's really what you have to remember. Okay, nothing real new there. The source file has line numbers in it just to kind of help us. Variables hold data. I'll let you read over that if you want to go over. I think 1.5 would be something you could read over mostly on your own. It's basically just what kind of, to make a program do what you want it to do, what would you need is what it's really asking. How do you process the input? You do want to check errors. This is telling you like what would be the first process you would do if you were working, especially on a larger program. Really small programs, you can sometimes mostly go straight to coding after a little bit of thought. But it's considered a bad idea to try to code something, especially like one of your projects. If I assign you a project, don't just sit down and start coding. There's a famous quote, I believe it was Fred Brooks, can't remember. He said something to the effect of, the sooner you start coding, the longer it's going to take you. And there's a lot of wisdom in that, because what happens is a lot of people are like, oh, I'll solve that problem real quickly, and then they'll start coding, but then they'll have to keep backing up and deleting things and moving stuff around, and then you end up with this mess of code that doesn't necessarily make as much sense as it could have. Sitting and thinking about your program, like they're saying, visualize the program running on the computer. Like, how is the user going to interact with this? How are you going to interact with it? Use design tools to create a model. So this could involve things like, you haven't learned any of this, but hierarchy charts, flow charts, pseudocode. Pseudocode is kind of like halfway between code and English, when we're just kind of jotting down what would be the steps for this program to accomplish its goals. Flowchart, we'll see a lot of those in the book. They're also called, there's a version of them, they're similar, called activity diagrams. Hierarchy charts help as well. So we check the, right here, you'll notice they're doing a whole lot of design. They're actually writing out all these diagrams and then looking at the model, the actual design first, before you even touch code. Before you even write any code, they want you to go through and actually think through the process of how is your program going to flow? How is it going to work? What steps do you need to take to actually get it to do what it's supposed to do? Then write the program source code and then compile the program source code. Okay. Correct errors if there are any during compilation. Link the program that's done by the IDE usually. Run the program to test the data and then correct any errors found while running. Notice these are two different steps. Correct errors found during compilation and correct errors found when you run the program. What's the difference? Well, the difference is there are different types of errors typically. The errors that you find during compilation, in other words, if your program will not compile, that means that you violated the syntax of the language or the grammar of the language. So you might have forgotten a or punctuation would be included in that. What about missing semicolon? Or what happens if I miss a, I forgot to actually declare this num1 right here. What is it? I just put an int there, and now it's already telling me a compiler error. It's saying identifier num1 is undefined, meaning I never said what is it? Like, what are you doing with it? Now I'm actually defining it or declaring the variable so it knows what it is. Now let's say everything works perfectly as far as you compiling. So compiling it, and it also does linking and stuff like that, is when I do build solution. That will compile and link. There is a compile option as well, but I do build because it's got to link and load and do all kinds of stuff. So it says build successful. So that's great. Now that doesn't mean that I know 100% that my program's perfect yet, though, just because it compiles. A lot of new programmers will do that. They'll think, oh, the program compiles, it must be ready to turn in. Okay, you have to test it. Okay, because you could expose other errors. Okay, so getting rid of grammar errors versus looking at errors at the end of product looks like. Yeah, in some ways, I would say if we're talking about something like a book or something like that, or a news article, the grammar errors are kind of a fundamental thing. But what if the actual whole statement has no grammar errors, but it just doesn't make sense? You know, like maybe someone miswrote something and wrote something like the the horse rode the queen through town. Okay, that has all kinds of bad connotations and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make good sense, at least. So it would make more sense to say, okay, well, the grammar in that is perfect, but it doesn't make logic sense. So there's another problem. So we found a error later on after we've already corrected the grammar. So that means we have to move stuff around, or maybe the logic of the code isn't right. And we have a further problem with programming where you could actually get a fatal runtime error, which means that what happens if you run your program but it crashes, meaning it actually freezes up or gives you a big ol' error and it says, you know, can't run this, or something went wrong, or memory access error, or array index out of bounds, or there's all kinds of stuff that can happen way after the grammar's been corrected. And then you want to validate the results of the program. This is actually another thing that is important, is making sure, did we actually solve the problem that I wanted to solve? Okay, so that's a big issue. That's called validation. So verification is, did you write the program correctly? Okay, meaning, is it free of errors? So it's a verification. Validation is, did you write the correct program? So there's a distinction there. Did you write the program correctly? Is the program that you wrote you know, free of the errors? But correct program is asking another question. It's asking, are you actually solving what you intended to solve? You could have a program free of errors, but did it actually solve your problem? And that has to do with validation. And that's what you want to do throughout the process, but also at the end, especially. Okay. And there's different levels of this, and it gets a lot more complicated once you get more into software engineering. For example, there's different levels of testing. There are people who, like I said, love the coding aspects or love the design aspects. There's people who love the coding aspects, and there's people who actually love the testing aspects. I know people who are professional testers. They write code occasionally, but a lot of times the code that they write is to write better tests, to try to test the main code that maybe the company or the group is working on. So basically, it's trying to expose errors in the code on the main program. So testing is something that you might find that you really, really enjoy doing. And some people find it boring as heck and they don't mess with it. But you still have to do your basic tests. But then after you're pretty confident everything is good, you might end up sending it to a completely different group of people that didn't write the code, for them to go through and try to break it, try to find problems with it. And then they'll send it back if they find problems, or they'll say we're good to go. And then the worst place for anyone to find problems is after you've said, yeah, good to go. And then the people that are in the testing group have said, yeah, good to go. And then it goes out onto the market and then people find bugs then. That's the worst place and most expensive to correct. The farther it gets away from you is the more expensive it is for your company to correct the problem. Okay. So users finding problems is not good usually. But it's inevitable in most cases. For people that, if you've had to get updates on software, which is very common on pretty much all software, but especially I use games as an example because they're very quick moving and they get updated a lot with very obvious updates. So the programs that they write, when they write hot fixes and updates and downloads, some of them are additions to the software, because people, especially in gaming, they want new and creative and exciting things to work on or to do in their game. But the problem is, what happens every time you modify or add a new feature to a program, whether it's a game or communication software or Microsoft Word, or like a document software or document reading software, digital editing software, painting software, whatever it is. What do you think is another danger anytime a new feature is added? Anyone want to take guesses? What are some dangers when you add new features to software? What do you think? When a company adds features to software? Bugs. Well, that's very general, right? It's yeah, something could break. So, but I would say there's different types of things, because you added a new feature. There could be a break in the actual code you released, the new feature, but there's also there could be a problem where the new feature you added, somehow the new code you added caused a problem in something that was working before, right? Before the new feature. Okay, so that's what we call a regression. It means that it caused a problem that wasn't a problem before, or brought back a problem that we had solved before. We reintroduced it somehow, or introduced a new problem causing the whole application. It could be a crash, or it could be just it works slowly, or doesn't work the way that they intended. It could be logic errors. It isn't always a crash, but crashes are definitely something you want to avoid. That's clearly going to frustrate your users. Those definitely should be, as best as possible. You want the problems to, as you said, stay in the house, right? Okay. Are there any questions about the class or any of the material we've been talking about? Please raise your hand or ask in the chat, and I will try to answer them. Todd, yes, do you have a question?
Yeah, I had just a personal question
Uh-huh.
on class selections,
On class what?
on class options for this semester.
Class options. Okay, I can answer that after. Do you want to wait around just a few
Yeah,
minutes?
sure.
Okay,
Sounds
all
good.
right. Yeah, that's fine. I will answer those before we call it. Does anyone have a question about the general stuff we've been talking about, or something specific we talked about, or the class in general? Anyone else? Anyone? Okay, you're dismissed. We actually got out fairly early this week. Thank you. I appreciate that. I will actually stop the recording, and you are welcome to leave the Zoom meeting at the moment. I will say, if I can find out how to, yeah, stop recording. Okay.